Back on the record, we stand in New Jersey versus Paul Caneiro. We will now have the summation from the state. Mr. Decker, when you're ready.
Thank you, Judge. Every time I give a summation, I tell myself I'm not going to respond. You know, I'm going to stick to my script, the things that I think are important. But every time I give a summation, I always respond. Can't help myself. You heard the way I look at what we heard this morning from Ms. Mastalone and this afternoon. You heard four things, the way I look at it. We heard about the DVR. We heard about the ballistics. We heard about the DNA. And then we heard about the family. Family dynamics, some of the testimony you heard from the defense witnesses. Now I'm going to talk about the DNA. I'm going to talk about the ballistics. I'm going to talk about the cameras. They're all very important. And I think it's important, I won't go any further than this, to note from the beginning just why you heard so much about the DNA and the ballistics and the cameras this morning. It appears to the state that we are trying very hard to explain away the DNA, to explain away the ballistics, and to figure out a way showing you pictures of police officers up above the refrigerator, trying to explain a way as to how an extension cord could have came out or whether or not he hit a button and shut it off. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no explanation for him, and we heard it for the first time today, that it was actually him in that garage shutting that off. There is no explanation for shutting that off. We'll talk about the Wi-Fi later. When we talk about family, we heard the testimony, and I don't demean anyone who came in here and testified for Mr. Caneiro. That is their right. They're longtime family friends. They knew some of the dynamic, right? They saw some interactions between Keith and Paul, right? They saw some interactions between Uncle Paul and Sophia and Jesse. But all of them didn't hear what they didn't hear. They didn't hear about the issues between Keith and Paul. They didn't hear the phone call the night before. Keith may be emotional, ladies and gentlemen, and Paul may be level-headed, right? Keith was looking for an answer that he never got. Maybe he would have forgave him. Maybe. He forgave him before. The state has never said otherwise. Remember, relax. Mr. Weinstein said, Keith, go to sleep, relax. We'll deal with it tomorrow, right? Ms. Mastalone said that this morning, right? Keith tried to go to sleep. He went to sleep. Either before midnight or after midnight on November 20th, 2018. He tried to go to sleep. But he was awoken. He was awoken because his power was cut. And he went to investigate it. He went to his basement. He went to look. He sees the generator should be on, right? Then he goes outside. But before he does, he sends a text message. And then another, and another, and another. To Paul, despite the anger, despite the issues, he still needed Paul for certain things. Remember, they even showed you an email during the course of the trial where Keith is asking Paul questions about his own electronics and the servers and the stuff in the basement. He needs Paul. And that's part of the frustration. Because remember, square one is 90-10. This is Keith's business. But Paul's got to do all this stuff. I think at least one witness told you about how, like, part of Paul's role is to do these things for Keith. So even after he's so upset with him, he's screaming at him to give him the password, trying to figure out where the money went, he still texts him. But ladies and gentlemen, what kind of a man, what kind of a family man shuts off his cameras and drives to Colts Neck, New Jersey in the middle of the night? What kind of a man goes there, rips off an electrical panel, shuts off the switch on the generator to ensure, despite all of the electrical backups, that power is not coming on? Now, his phone's home, so he's not getting those messages, I don't believe, from his brother. He doesn't get that 318 message which says, I'm going outside to check the generator. What kind of a man, what kind of a family man, what kind of a brother lies in wait for his brother to come outside in the dark, only to be shot 5 times? Only to have his older brother walk up, likely very calmly, place a gun to the back or side of his hooded head and pull that trigger one last time. What kind of a family man is that? As if that was not enough, what kind of a man then chooses to go inside that house in the darkness to go and find his sister-in-law and 11-year-old Jesse Caneiro and 8-year-old Sophia Caneiro? Couldn't he have just stopped with his brother? At least he did that quickly and painlessly. What kind of a man does this? Now, one of the things that was brought up, kind of harped on, was the fact that why would someone kill for relatively small amounts of money, right? You know, the thefts and all that kind of stuff. Why would that happen? Well, one of the things that Miss Wallace told you in openings is that she said, we're here. Paul Caneiro is here because of the evidence, not because of the motive. And I'm going to talk about it as I go, but the motive is learned later. That's not something that comes up. He's not suspected and arrested, etc., because of the motive. Lieutenant Petrozello said it best when he said, we followed the evidence. I'm a little sick of hearing about 2 people, which is sort of the first time today. I'm a little sick of hearing about Corey Caneiro. What did you hear about Corey Caneiro during the course of this trial? You heard he was a brother. Okay? He's the youngest brother. You heard he's bald. You heard that he was a contingent beneficiary to the Keith Caneiro irrevocable trust. Right? Him and Paul, 50-50. Now, what's interesting about that is what you never heard in this courtroom. And that is that Corey Caneiro had any clue that he was a contingent beneficiary to this trust. You never heard that. He knew about the trust because, as they pointed out this morning, Keith would complain to Corey a lot about Paul and his thefts from the trust. But Corey had no idea, based upon the evidence in this case, that he stood to gain either 50% or 100% or whatever was on that screen earlier. Now, there's some questioning during the course of the trial where I think it was intimated that maybe Paul Caneiro didn't know that he stood to benefit as a contingent beneficiary. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in 1999, Paul Caneiro signed that trust. He is the trustee. To argue that he did not know is ridiculous. But like I said, we're not here because of the financial motive. You did hear a lot of testimony, and it is important. But murder doesn't make sense. I'm not going to stand here this afternoon in front of 16 people who have spent a lot of time and a lot of attention and sacrificed a lot and tell them that because he got caught stealing somewhere probably under $75,000, we acknowledge, that that was a good reason to kill. What I'm going to tell you today, and what Ms. Wallace told you earlier, is that it's not about what he stood to gain. It's about what he stood to lose. And we will talk about that. But I wanted to start off, now that I digressed enough, with some questions, like rhetorical questions, regarding the evidence in this case. And the first one I want to talk about is, why would Paul Caneiro shut his DVR off at 1:28 a.m. in the morning? We'll get there. Why then would he go down to his own basement and shut off the two Nest cameras, those two Wi-Fi cameras in the basement? Now those are Wi-Fi, okay? I think we all get that. What's in the garage, as we've heard a lot of testimony about, were hardwired cameras. I showed S418 at one point, the power box right above the QC DVR, the power for the QC DVR. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that Mr. Caneiro said to the police on scene that day when he was cooperative, okay? But now we're talking about Wi-Fi cameras. He's gone to his garage in the middle of the night when he's told police he's sleeping, and he's walked up, faces the camera, and all of a sudden it shuts off. If there's another explanation for what happened there, I have no idea what it is. But there's only one reason you would shut off your cameras 30 minutes before you drive to Cold Snack and kill 4 people. Now, we're going to talk about this as we go, but when we look at the two Wi-Fi cameras, okay, these are notifications from Nest, right? They're emails that Mr. Paul Caneiro received at 1:31 or shortly thereafter, which indicates that those two cameras were shut off at 1:31 a.m. in the morning. Now, the first one has a specific area in the corner of the basement near the egress window where the fire started, right? And we'll talk about this specifically as we go. The second one is that basement work area, right? And that one, it actually captures his picture there when the electricity is shut off to that camera. That's the last thing that camera saw. Mr. Caneiro, shirtless like he just was in the garage, shutting off the cameras in his basement. Now, sometimes we get ahead of ourselves, but I did say I'd do it later. But the locations of those two cameras, ladies and gentlemen, you cannot escape from if you're Paul Caneiro in this case. We're going to talk a lot about evidence found in that basement. We're going to talk about that pile of clothing. Where was that pile of clothing found? Heads up, slide on the left, S273. Where are all the guns? Where's the gun locker? Slide on the right, S274. It's easy now to try to make up an excuse for why you would shut off your cameras when it really, really looks bad. Why, ladies and gentlemen, we talk about guns and whether he would have used the one with the rails for the laser sight. I don't know why that is necessary. I don't know where the testimony with regard comes from. He chose to use the gun that he chose to use. He didn't need a laser sight on that gun. There is lighting outside of Keith's house. You saw it on the video when he's jumping up trying to shut it off. I don't know, does he have a flashlight too? I don't really know. But I don't know what the point of the gun that is not registered to him with no serial number or whatever, why that has anything to do with this case. But we can talk about this gun. Now this is not the murder weapon, okay? This is the other Sig Sauer, right? This is the one that's found in Paul Caneiro's Paul Caneiro's bedroom in the drawer, right? And when it was tested by Sergeant Clayton from the state police, one of the things he noted in his report is that in the chamber was this laser sight, laser bore sight, which is something that you use with this. It's a laser target, it's a laser target. It's a training system, okay? And we'll talk about like when this was used and why it's relatively important. But sometimes the murder weapon isn't the only weapon that actually matters. You know, we talked about it, and they talked about it this morning, about how he's a firearms owner, right? Now, we talked about this during jury selection. I'm sure you all remember it. People have the right to bear arms in this country. We all understand that. I'm not, and Miss Wallace, we didn't show you these guns to belabor the point that he's got a lot of guns, ladies and gentlemen, he must have done it. That's not the purpose. The purpose is this is a sophisticated individual who owns a bunch of guns. He's got a ton of ammunition. He's got gun cleaning supplies. He's got targets hanging up next to those. He's got rifles, everything. But he's also someone who knows how to use it, right? He knows how to use this gun. And this is going to come in a little later, where we found this and why it's important. There's been a lot of talk about contamination and transfer and all these things that, you know, you kind of do when the DNA really hurts you, when your niece's DNA just happens to be found in your basement. If Paul Caneiro was set up, why would that person, Corey Caneiro, whoever it may have been, why would they then try to destroy the evidence? They're trying to frame him. They somehow get his blood and DNA on gloves and jeans and shirts. They get his niece's hair on a scarf in that pile, but then they try to destroy it. If that makes any sense, I'll sit down right now. If Paul's set up, and we didn't talk about the barrels today at all, I don't think. If he was set up, why would that person, Corey Caneiro, whoever it is, why would they then swap out the barrel to that other Sig Sauer? Why would they want to make it difficult for law enforcement? Chris Clayton from New Jersey State Ballistics. Why would they want to make it difficult for him to make a ballistics match? It doesn't make any sense. And then, where did we find the backpack with the barrel? We found it in the Porsche Cayenne, Susan Caneiro's vehicle. The one that he happened to pull out of the garage, right? The one that they sat in at some point on Tilton Drive, and the one that they drove to the police department. Now, I don't think there's a chance in this world that he thought, A, he was going to end up at the Ocean Township Police Department, and B, that car, his wife's, was going to be searched that day. But if you're setting Paul Caneiro up, you're putting that backpack, the barrel, the silencer, whatever else is in there, all his worldly possessions, you're putting it in the Macan, aren't you? Why wouldn't you put it in the car that drives to Colts Neck and kills everybody? That's really not a great way to frame something. How would Corey or whoever have known that Paul Caneiro was going to pull the Cayenne out of the garage at 4:59 and 55 seconds or whatever it is? How would that person, how would Corey know that? The answer is they wouldn't know that. And it doesn't make any sense. If Paul was being set up, why wouldn't there be more blood in the Macan? I'm not sure I understood the argument this morning. We didn't find any blood in the Macan, right? Okay. I think we all can agree, I hope, that Macan, I think it seemed to be conceded, that Macan drives to Colts Neck in the middle of the night, and that Macan comes back at 4:08 a.m. So it's like we know the car is used. Whoever did this used that car. So whoever did this didn't leave a lot of blood. It doesn't mean that he didn't leave a lot of blood or someone else didn't leave. No matter who used the car to kill everybody, they didn't leave a lot of blood. So why, if you're trying to frame someone, why would Paul Caneiro be so careful to not contaminate the car? Because as you were told, and I'm going to tell you right now, you heard testimony first about how they didn't look for blood in the car, right? Despite there was the ALS and the blue light and all that kind of stuff that they can do, and they did, right? Maybe they didn't do it in the bathrooms. We'll talk about that. But then you heard when we called Trooper Cocky from the New Jersey State Police, right? We told you then that he brought his cadaver dog, right? A cadaver dog, obviously, is a dog that's trained to seek out and find evidence, odors of human remains. And the first place that dog went was in the Porsche Macan, and you heard that there was no indications inside, despite the thing about on his arm from giving blood that morning, which we didn't show you because we knew he gave blood. We're not trying to deceive anybody here. We knew what that was all about. But then the dog goes to the back, to the storage area of the Macan, and has a positive indication, right, for the presence of human remains. Now, you heard that it was tested and it was negative. It is what it is. Trooper Cochran told you that the dog is able to detect residual odors, right? And then the dog, if he wasn't clear that the dog kind of had a good nose for this stuff, the first thing they do when they enter the house is they find some blood on the door frame, right? And it turns out, actually, they do inquire as to where the blood came from, and it turns out it came from one of the firefighters, Sean Ensign. Got a buccal swab, and ultimately it was tested, confirmed to be his DNA. Creed, the canine, then is taken off lead throughout the house, and ultimately, nothing upstairs, nothing on the main floor, and then he goes down to the basement, down the stairs, through the left door, immediately into the unfinished side of the basement, where we saw that camera, where you didn't see what happened there because he shut the cameras off, right? And that dog hit for the odor of human remains, which made a lot of sense once they looked at the pile and they saw the blood and the jeans and the scarf and the shirts and the gloves with his niece and his nephew's DNA on it. So it's not like they didn't look. It actually took the dog to make sense of that. So why, if we're framing someone, are we being so careful? You've been told a lot about what wasn't done, or why they didn't follow the money, or why they didn't do this or look into Corey. But the evidence that you have, the stuff that they're really trying to get out of, trying to get away from. They didn't shut off the DVR. Man, it's transfer evidence. Oh, the ballistics, I don't know. The ballistics is pretty conclusive, I think, based upon the testimony. I'm not sure exactly where that's going. But what do these things tell you? And they tell you investigatively that Paul Caneiro did this. It was discussed that the state has the burden of proving this case to you beyond a reasonable doubt. Absolutely. That is our burden. Miss Wallace and I, we readily accept that. That's the way the system works. But it does work both ways, right? You have to understand what the standard means and what reasonable doubt means. It's not just one little thing that wasn't done. It's an honest and reasonable uncertainty as to the defendant's guilt. But there is none, ladies and gentlemen. It was not set up. You heard a lot of testimony recently about how he was a smart guy, he was a tech guy, meticulous, level-headed, et cetera, et cetera. And in the opening, and again this morning, Ms. Mastalone said to you, and I get it, she's doing her job. She said,
Objection.
Overruled.
that was a compliment. What she said was, why would Paul Caneiro do this, but then lead the police to his house by setting a fire? And the answer to that is, he was trying to destroy the evidence. He wasn't leading the police to the jeans and the scarf and all that evidence. He was trying to destroy it. It just didn't work. You heard from John Lightbody, the expert who did the origin and cause at 27 Tilden. Remember he showed that picture in the in the family room, and he actually kind of marked out a line of demarcation, and he said, yeah, this is basically where the firefighters were able to stop this fire from spreading. Because you saw the fire, and you're going to see it again today. I mean, that fire was no joke. It's just that a bunch of people, including sort of Chris Sorrentino, got there really quickly and were able to contain it. That fire was supposed to destroy the evidence. But understand, like, he's a smart guy, he's tech savvy, he does some smart things in the beginning, I think, maybe before he does all this. You know, he plugs his phone in, you know, hey, we can track phones, that sort of thing. That wasn't dumb, right? That was a pretty smart move. It's okay. But the problem with things like this, the problem with murder, especially when you kill your niece and your nephew, is that no matter how ruthless the crime is or your intent is, you still never know how you're going to react after something like that. I mean, none of us know. He just annihilated his nephew and his niece. And then he's got to get the hell out of it. We'll talk about the timeline. 6 minutes. We'll talk about that. Not a problem. But he's now left Colt's neck after doing what he did and setting the fire and cutting the Verizon line. And he's driving home and they're asking, well, why didn't he get rid of the evidence? He could have thrown it here. He could have thrown it there. He's not thinking rationally, first of all. And second of all, there's one thing that you really need to understand. These guns, these two 6 hours, okay? You heard they're registered to Paul Caneiro. He is a lawful gun owner. So this and that and all the other ones we showed you, they're on file with the state of New Jersey. Okay? They're registered firearms. So if he ditches this gun, the first thing the police are going to do in Ocean is go, hey, where's the 6 hour? 229. So it's not that simple. So he can't get rid of the gun, and he tried to get rid of the DNA. It just didn't work. I mean, he didn't call 911, right? Caitlin Caneiro, his daughter, called 911. He didn't call. You think he wanted that to not be destroyed? Think about that, okay? It's disingenuous, like a lot of the other things when he was cooperative that he said to the police that morning. It's kind of like not wearing shoes, right? It's kind of screaming like, hey, look at me, I was asleep. We'll talk. But just imagine driving home after doing all that, and you got to get home quickly, right? You got to get home quickly because there was 6 gunshots. So Lord only knows who's calling 911, right? So he's got to get the hell out of there. And he's driving home, and he chooses to bring the evidence home and set him on fire. And he's got that voice in his head, right? He's thinking about that special bond with Jesse. And he's thinking about, God, what I just did to my niece. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to being smart and doing smart things. It lends itself to sloppiness, which is exactly what happened here. And it wasn't like he led us to the evidence. He tried to get rid of it. Now, when we talk about what happens in Colt's Neck, we talk about the relationship between Keith and Paul, you know, Keith being his younger brother, and the way that he executed it. The years of, I would submit to you, somewhat jealousy. Because Paul Caneiro's mind, he put in a lot of work into Square One and EvoStar. I think you saw that from the messages. And I think he feels underappreciated. He's not getting his share, and he's doing all these things for his brother. One can imagine how that can build up. One can somewhat, I'm not excusing it, trust me, but one can somewhat imagine the brother on brother. But like the kids, I can't give you a motive. Financial, otherwise. I can't come up with a motive that would ever justify him or anyone doing that to Sophia and Jesse and Jennifer. So I believe they're overstating the motive, the financial motive. But remember, he did stand to lose a lot. And again, I've already said some of that stuff. I apologize, I'm not an expert with PowerPoint. I'll try my best not to repeat myself. But one of the other things that I didn't say, I talked about the 911 call, and that's Dennis Kapoor, right? And we're going to listen to it, at least to some extent, at 3:30. And ultimately, there was a lot of testimony. When did you call? And remember, he was lying in bed. And ultimately, he says he called. He heard it about 2:26. We know the call's about 3:30. But also remember, he's got to get out of there quick, and that's why, to a certain extent, he's very sloppy. And that's why he doesn't necessarily get rid of certain things in certain places. Because not only do we have the potential for someone calling 911, which actually happened, but we also, there's really no reason to believe that Paul Caneiro, when he started the fire in the basement, that he meant for it to like smolder, right? You know, like, he set it fire. I mean, he's in a rush. He just killed everyone. He's about to cut the line. We know there's a fire. They're not contending it, but it's like, how did it start? There's a bottle of alcohol in there. There's torch strikers. It doesn't really matter. But what we know from the evidence is that it took hours for that to build up and to grow and to become what it was, which ultimately kind of happened when the Colts Neck police arrived in the fire. They started opening other doors. You saw Dr. Boris open the door. So, like, Paul Caneiro's not expecting that this is not going to be like a reported fire soon. He's got to worry about the fire call, because why wouldn't it go up quickly? I mean, it didn't, but why wouldn't it? And then he's got to worry about the 911. It's important to note is that this case is not about any one piece of evidence. I'm not saying convict him of murders because he shut the camera off. I'm not saying it because the car leaving in the middle of the night. I'm not saying it because I'm going to tell you that Paul Caneiro's outside that garage door in Colts Neck at 2:51 in the morning. I'm not going to tell you to convict him just because of the DNA or even the ballistics. It's a combination of all these things. It's easy after 7 years to say, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. But it's hard to say in this case, impossible, I suspect, to say that the detectives, Petrozello, Zarillo, Brady, Weisbach, that they didn't follow the evidence. Like, what did you ever hear that should have said to those guys, hey, we should get Corey's financial records. Hey, we should look closer at Elisa's phone, which they only looked at for 2 days. There's nothing there. We didn't get his DNA, ladies and gentlemen.
Objection. So there's nothing there if they didn't look at it.
Overruled.
I didn't mean the phone. I didn't mean the phone. I was talking about there was nothing. I'm sorry, just to cut you off.
Yeah.
Can I clarify?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, what I was trying to say was that there was nothing there that made Corey Caneiro look like a suspect. Like, you've heard nothing other than he's got a motive because he's a contingent beneficiary of a trust that was signed in 1999 when he was a lot younger, that he doesn't know about. That's all you've heard. And interestingly enough about that is the fact that they're arguing to you that Corey's got this motive, right? He's got this financial motive. He stood to gain 1.5 million or 3 million, Slayer statue, whatever it may be. But then in the same breath, they're saying that our motive for Mr. Caneiro to do this isn't good. But you can't have it both ways. I mean, it's the same motive, right? It's just that Corey Caneiro has that one motive, and then Mr. Paul Caneiro has all the evidence stacked up against him, the motive because of the trust. And also, oh yeah, he stole from his brother 19 times in 2018. did you hear any evidence that Corey Caneiro ever stole $1 from Keith Caneiro? Did you hear Keith call Paul, or did you hear Keith call Corey and say, Corey, where's the money? What'd you do with it? Why are you taking my money? You didn't hear that. So you don't get someone's DNA. You don't go get DNA just because. Like, you talk about family relationships, right? Dr. Reich, and we'll talk about it. I'm probably getting ahead of myself, but we'll get there. We heard from Dr. Reich about, like, allele sharing, and we all share DNA, and we actually share like 99.8% of family, but that's why we look at certain places, and we know Keith and Paul shared about 72%. But like, all of a sudden, Dr. Reich just throws a column on there that says Corey Caneiro with a bunch of question marks. Yes, we don't have his DNA. But why should we have his DNA? Like, we don't have Susan Caneiro's DNA, right? We don't have Caitlin's DNA. We don't have Marissa's DNA. I mean, could they have shared alleles? Yeah, of course they could, because they're family. I mean, when you did the math, Jennifer Caneiro actually shares like 38% of DNA with Paul Caneiro, and they're not even family. So I don't say that because I'm telling you that Miss Caneiro and her daughters had anything to do with this, to be clear. I'm just saying that it's no different than Corey Caneiro. What if there was a fourth brother? You don't just ask for DNA and send it out because somebody stands to gain something that they don't even know about. Because let's just put it in perspective what we're talking about here. The Keith Caneiro Irrevocable Trust. Keith dies, money goes to Jen. Jen dies, money goes to the kids, right? The kids die, as Mr. Cardenas told you, it actually goes to the grandkids if they exist, right? Because remember, when this was created, the kids didn't even exist. Jen and Keith weren't even married yet. So think about all the things that actually have to happen before either Paul or Corey could ever see a dime. It wasn't designed for them. Mr. Cardenas told you that. It was designed to benefit the children. That was Keith's intent. So it's a pretty far-fetched argument to make that we should have accused Corey of murder because he stood to gain $1.5 million that he didn't even know about. Investigation, okay? It's not just about the things I told you, the DNA, the ballistics, and the cameras. They're all very helpful. And I just want to put something in context, because we're here 7 years later, right? And you got to sit here, we put witnesses on, and then they put some witnesses on, and you got to hear testimony. Lieutenant Catalona comes in, he says, I found this, this, and that. And Detective Mahoney comes in, he says, I watched this camera. But like, that didn't just happen, right? Like, that's part of an investigation where, it starts at 27 Tilden, and then you go to 15 Willowbrook. That seems not secure, and then the detectives have to start digging, right? And they wind up finding cameras. And they don't find any on one side of Tilden. I don't know what to tell you. That was testified to that they looked. Did they document? A lot of times people don't document things that they don't find. But they looked. And what we found was 30 Tilden and 308 Green Grove. And it's interesting because I want you to try to keep in perspective that, like, there's a fire, and then the investigation starts, and then you find out about murders in Colts Neck. And then you start looking at addresses on Willowbrook, and then you start looking on Tilden, and you kind of find what you find. And again, today, you heard Ms. Mastalone say that that's Mr. Caneiro in the garage shutting off his cameras. But, like, that's not something that's ever been acknowledged. Okay, you didn't hear the detectives testify that was Paul Caneiro shutting off his cameras. That's for you to do. But now I think obviously it's clear that Mr. Caneiro is the one who did that. But I want you to keep in perspective that this is a buildup. It wasn't just like, hey, this guy's the homeowner, we got to suspect that he burned his house down. He was treated like a victim at 27 Tilton in the morning, right? It wasn't until a certain point when they started to go, hey, we got to look at this guy. And they probably didn't even realize at the time how suspicious and interesting the things were that he said to them about the cameras and the DVR and, like, what color's the box and all that kind of stuff. They don't realize that right away. And then we start to look at things that are found that maybe, like, you know, they didn't really talk about it, but like, when we talk about ballistics and why ballistics is important, you know, I think it was on cross-examination, Sergeant Clayton, the ballistic shooter, got asked about Fiocchi ammunition, and they started asking him, is it rare? Yeah, it's rare. I mean, but think about how we go from one place to another. It's not like zero in, tunnel vision, like they're arguing. It's like, hey, we found a bunch of bullets. We found a bunch of shell casings at 15 Willowbrook. And they just all happen to have the same head stamp. They all happen to be the same caliber. And then they all happen to get sent to the New Jersey State Police. And ultimately, they all match each other, right? And then we'll talk about those cross comparisons, about how these are linked to guns and barrels. But Fiocchi ammunition, like you heard, it's rare, right? It happened to be in his basement, a lot of it. And it happened to be at the crime scene in Colts Neck. Same ammunition found at the crime scene as his basement. It's just another thing that's just not a coincidence. When we talk about rarity, again, it's not as rare, though, as some of those likelihood ratios and some of those random match probabilities you saw with respect to Sophia Caneiro as well as him. Like I said, one of the things that I hope to accomplish, one of the things I hope to do justice to today is to make all 16 of you, now you probably already get it because you've been so patient, just understand that no one zeroed in on Paul Caneiro. Ocean Police didn't respond to 27 Tilden that morning, look, and just said, this guy doesn't have shoes on, he must have done it, right? They didn't even know. You want to talk about swabbing his hands or gunshot residue analysis on his hands? You saw the pictures when the pictures were taken of his injury. It's like 12 plus hours after the shooting occurred in Colts Neck. Like, you're never going to do that 12 plus hours later. He's been to the bathroom, all kinds of things. He's washed his hands, those sorts of things. So just understand, like, if they knew at 5 o'clock in the morning that there was a house on fire in Colts Neck and Keith Caneiro was dead on the front lawn, they probably would have swabbed his hands, right? But like, they can't control what they don't know, and it's a process, right? Investigations are a process. So now we're here. So now we're getting to the point where police respond to 27 Tilden Drive for that fire. Okay, it's about 5:02 in the morning. They arrive there. And the first person on scene, I mentioned him already, is Chris Sorrentino, who you heard from. And Chris Sorrentino, like Miss Mastalone said, he lives right around the block. So he's in bed, he gets the page, and all of a sudden, you know, he jumps in his truck. He's got a take-home car, lights and sirens, because he's actually the fire mechanic for the town. But he says he jumps in his car after he got dressed quickly, and he makes a left, makes a right, makes another right, makes a right on Tilden Drive, finds the house, pulls up, parks, and goes up to investigate. Now, Chris Sorrentino, I would submit to you, is important to this investigation because he's the first one there, okay? And he told you about how it's dark and that ultimately he gets out of his truck. He doesn't have anything, doesn't have any like fire extinguisher or anything. I think he said he's got his radio. And he goes straight up to the front door of 27 Tilden Drive, okay? As he's going up the lawn, he said, someone yells, everybody's out of the house. And he turns around and ultimately it's Mr. Caneiro and family in the Cayenne on Tilden Drive. Sorrentino then goes inside to investigate, and he realizes when he looks through the living room window that the fire's outside, goes back to his truck, probably pretty quickly, right? And he's grabbing these 2 water cans, right? Basically like little fire extinguishers. And now he goes to the back of the residence, to the back right, next to the gas meter, and he attempts to start to extinguish the fire with what he has. Now, you saw this previously, and we're just going to watch it. It's pretty short. But this is ultimately what we're seeing upon Sorrentino's arrival to the backyard and the police have arrival. We'll skip past this. We'll come back to that in a break. It worked last time. Now, one of the things, though, in this video, what you're going to see is this is when you see Chris Sorrentino, you see what he's wearing. He's wearing dark clothing. He's wearing, like, jeans and a hoodie. He's got these water cans. And ultimately, when he gets to the back, and I think at this point he's basically now going to get water cans 3 and 4. And you see from this angle, and basically where this is taken from is a body worn camera of one of the officers. And he's standing near Marilyn Klein, the neighbor's driveway. Remember, there wasn't any cars in the driveway yet. But what you see here is basically one of the first responders shining a flashlight, right? And what they're shining a flashlight at, ultimately, is that fire that you can see there. And it's probably about 5:05 now a.m. And you see that fire in the rear of the home. I say that because it's been argued extensively this morning and in the past that we ignored Heather Capp and we ignored Jonathan Harrington's information. You know, the 4:30 thing. I'm going to say first things first. You don't tell people what to say. I think that's clear based upon the investigation. We don't try to change times. I never asked either one of them during their testimony, are you sure it was 4:30? No, because that's what they said. It's not right for us to try to correct things that we know are incorrect, but it's not their recollection. So ultimately, I would tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that we followed the evidence. We evaluated, the detectives evaluated what they said, what they saw, what they heard, and they came up with a conclusion. Now, Ms. Mastalone summarized Ms. Capp's testimony. But what I would suggest that you keep in perspective is what is extremely clear. I'm not here telling you that she didn't say 4:30. She did. But what she's very clear about in her first statement to the defense investigators, then to the police, and then at trial was that she hears something. She's in bed, right? It's 4:30, whatever, 5 o'clock in the morning. She's lying in bed and she hears something. And based upon that, she goes, gets out of bed, she says something to her husband, and then she goes and looks out the window. And what she's never deviated from, and she did not deviate from here, is that when she looks out that window, first of all, it's dark. And second of all, she sees the guy by the front door, and she sees the guy pointing the flashlight over by Marilyn's driveway. And she does see people run back to the street after that. We'll discuss that. But when I asked her, when you looked with the guy with the flashlight, did you look where he was pointing the flashlight? Yes, immediately. And what did you see when you looked there? And what she saw was fire. So people are wrong about times. It happens all the time. And I'm not saying it makes her a bad person. I'm not saying she's lying. I don't think she is. I think that that's what she thought at the time when someone came and spoke to her. But she's very clear that one of the first things she sees is a flashlight and a fire. And you know what time that fire started. It shows up on the 19 Oxford Drive cameras at just about 4:57. That's when it first becomes visible. And I'll show you in the presentation at some point the words. exactly what you can see. Remember there was some daytime footage from 19 Oxford, and you can count, we counted the windows, 1, 2, 3, 4 windows on top 27 Tilden. And then you see kind of the line of demarcation. And when you look at a picture of the house, like a regular picture of the house, you see what you can see on the cameras. And you can see like just about where the fire started. So we know that fire starts at about 4:56, 4:57. And it was talked about it's a gas-fed fire, and I think Lightbody talked about it. But gas-fed fires, they go. And that's why we saw that large flash, and then it subsides. But Heather Capp is just wrong about the time. Jonathan Harrington, he actually doesn't see the fire until he goes outside, but he doesn't even look. He doesn't get out of bed. He just hears what he hears. He hears voices. And then he basically eventually gets up, changes, goes downstairs, and makes the observations of the fire, and first responders are already there. So, I get it. I get the argument. I'm not arguing with it. I'm not telling you that they shouldn't make the argument. I get it. But these aren't mystery men, ladies and gentlemen. These are first responders. It's Chris Sorrentino, and I think I may have said it already today, but what I would point out, and I think it's obvious, is that if Corey Caneiro or whoever did whatever he did, and then he came back to 27 Tilton Drive, and he set in a fire, like, at 4:30 in the morning, would he be knocking on the door? Like, why would he be trying to wake people up? It doesn't make any sense. The only person who went to the door, the first person who went to the door, was Chris Sorrentino. And that's what Heather Capp saw. And then she saw the assistant fire chief, who was second, pulled his truck into the driveway. And then we had the patrolman, that video, you've seen it. It's the flashlight and it's the fire. And that's exactly the time, just about, when Heather Capp starts watching what she sees. Now, one of the things, I plan to talk about it, but Ms. Mastalone was discussing the fire, the flash of fire at 5:01, it's about 5:01:16, 5:01 to 26 or 27. And one of the things she said is that, like, Paul Caneiro couldn't have set that fire, right? Because he pulled the Cayenne out of the garage. Now, we showed you that. We know what time Paul pulls the Cayenne out of the garage. We already talked about it. But to argue that he's outside in the street with the family at now, it's about 5:01 and change, right? So then the same people that are there at 4:30, the same two guys, are there at 32 minutes later, and Paul and his family are already out of the house, sitting in the car in the street, and then these people are sticking around to set a fire? That doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. I'll talk to you about how that fire got set as we go forward. I think when you watch that video, you see movement around that time on those cameras. You know, Ms. Messalem argued that Mr. Caneiro was in the car with his family the entire time. I think she even said that the state told you they were in the car together. They were in the car together. We didn't tell you exactly what point in time he pulled the car out, parked it, and every single person went into the car. I mean, because, you know, Mrs. Caneiro went in, she got the dog leashes, right? You know, she got shoes and all that kind of stuff. So, like, it's not like everybody's around. Like, it's easy enough to be like, hey, I got the car out. Oh, I left the garage door open. Let me go back over there. Or maybe he lit something when he was before he pulled the car out, and it just didn't catch right away. I mean, the fire, obviously, I guess there is spontaneous combustion. We heard about that in ruling out fire. But it wasn't someone else. I mean, Mr. Caneiro and his family didn't see anyone else, right? They never told the police that day that I was over by the garage or I wasn't over by the garage, someone was over there. So, like, we'll talk about that in a little more detail when we look at the video. But we know, based upon the investigation, it wasn't like it wasn't challenged or investigated, but we know that Heather Capp and Jonathan Harrington saw the first responders, because we know what time the fire started. And they're crystal clear that her first observations, she sees the fire. Remember, she's on a diagonal across the street, and she's actually kind of looking into the back. The fire's actually, by her testimony, the fire's not even above the roof yet. It's just down. She's actually seeing it from an angle. So that point, ladies and gentlemen, I suspect that's not something that was ignored. It wasn't ignored, and it also is not something where we told people what to say or to change their story, because that's not the way these things work, okay? And also, I'll get to the point where I'm able to show that video. Can we play that video? Thank you.
You have to switch the table? Is that what you're asking?
Sorry.
Hey, is everybody out of that house?
Yeah, Durham Street.
Watch your head, watch your head.
Yeah, guys moving down the street.
Can you pause that for a moment? Sorry. See this area right here, ladies and gentlemen? This is the Cap House. And you heard testimony about where the house is. Across the street is the Harrington house. He can only see the front of the house, so he's got to see the fire above the roof. Heather Cap is looking right here. I just want, if it hasn't been made clear yet, just to see how dark it is. Because there was, that whole thing about baseball hats or whatever, black caps. I don't know what to tell you, to be honest with you. I don't know what that means. I have no idea. But I can tell you that from her window, this is what she sees. She sees lights and she sees movement and she hears things. And this is what they're doing.
Nobody's here. That's not gonna help. It's
Go. Everybody got it now? Yeah, they're in a car. There's nothing you can do. Let's get out of here.
Can we go back to this table? I'm sorry. So when we look at that photo, we just talked about it, but there's 4 windows up here. So when we look at camera 7 from 19 Oxford, this is like the cutoff right here. Right about here, you'll see it from the video. So you're seeing the fire evolving in that classic V or U formation, right around here. So you may not see the first spark of fire, but you're seeing the fire basically shortly after it started. So this is what the police are looking at in 27 Tilton. This is what they arrived to once the fire is ultimately extinguished. And here we're looking at that basement window, right? And what's important to note here, we can see the hoses. It's kind of like when we saw the hoses in the other pictures over by the jeans and everything in the pile. But the fire starts right here and ultimately travels into the basement. And this is right about where you find that pile. So if there's any doubt that someone was trying to destroy the evidence in the basement, the jeans, I think it's pretty clear when you look at it from that perspective. Here we see an electrical panel in 27 Tilton. The one thing you should note, and I know you guys are long become experts on electrical panels and generators, but this has a little JCP&L tag here, right? This is what happens, this is what it looks like when the power company actually comes and pulls the meter, okay? They keep the case on, the door on, and they put that little lock there. So, obviously, you'll all recall the gas can. One of the first things that the officers, once they made their way around to the driveway side, 27 Tilton, they find that red gas can. And I know you saw the video where one of the officers, I think it was Mankowski, might have been Redmond, actually extinguished it right away. Right? It's a small fire by the time they get there. You saw it already grow. You've seen the video. You saw the way it flashed out. You saw ultimately the way that it's going to connect with the Macan. there was some cross-examination at some point about, well, didn't Paul Caneiro tell the officers that, that he didn't know where his gas can was, he thought it was in the shed? I say that because it seemed like that cross-examination was like intimating that he was actually being honest about it. Because he is asked a lot of things by the officers. We know about the DVR and stuff. But they asked him the last time he was in the shed, and he couldn't remember. And he said he had no knowledge of this gas can out here. I mean, I'm not saying that's the smoking gun. What I'm saying is, it's not like if he left the gas can there, he's just gonna say, oh yeah, I left the gas can over there like a couple minutes ago. So just for purposes of understanding the cross-examination in that regard. Because when we look at context as to what he said, he said he doesn't know where his gas cans are, he thinks they're in the shed. But he also said, let's just keep in context, that he told the police that morning that he was sleeping. The last time he was in the basement was at 4 p.m. the day before. We know these things aren't true. His daughter said she never saw him when she got home that night because he was upstairs in his bedroom. He was. He never came down, right? That doesn't mean he was sleeping. Obviously, there was a bunch of cross-examination, a lot of testimony about the shed and the footprints, and what ultimately they found, and there's another 2 gas cans on the other side of the shed, but here's that little space here where the gas can that was found by the driveway could fit. It's just something that, stuck out to the officers at the time. It didn't mean that Mr. Caneiro was the one who took it out of there. It was just something that was noted at the night. But let's talk about what Mr. Caneiro says upon police arrival. He said the last time he was in the basement, like I just said, was 4 p.m. the day before. Now, that's not true for a variety of reasons, one of which is when he shut off the camera by his workbench where all the guns were. You saw that happen at 1:31 a.m. He's on camera when the camera shut off. So we know he's in the basement at 1:31. He says a lot of things, and this is why I think maybe even makes it more important. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation today in summation by the defense about the cameras, but also Paul Caneiro couldn't figure out what to tell the police that morning about the cameras. He tells the fire marshal, Craig Flanagan, that his cameras weren't working. He tells one of the ocean officers that he's been having trouble or having issues with stuff in the garage. He tells Detectives Brady and Weisbrot that he can't remember if he turned his cameras off. And then he tells him the thing about the cameras causes Wi-Fi to run slowly. There's a big difference between the types of cameras. The hardwired, the only effect the Wi-Fi has, and there was testimony about this, is if they want to watch the app. If he wants to watch the app on his phone for his QC DVR, he could do that. And he could do it through Wi-Fi on his phone. But the Wi-Fi has no effect on that. He shut it off. And it's really, really a damning piece of evidence. Mona, can we take a short break?
Sure.
I apologize.
Can you just move that?
It's like a different version now.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break. I'll give you about 10 minutes or so. If you need longer, you can take it, and then we'll bring you back out. I want you to stretch and make sure you're good.